listening to the Art of Homeschooling podcast, where we help parents cultivate creativity and connection at home. I'm your host, Jean Miller, and here on this podcast, you'll find stories and inspiration to bring you the confidence you need to make homeschooling work for your family. Let's begin. Well, hey there, and welcome to episode 3 of the Art of Homeschooling podcast. Relax into your homeschool rhythm. That's right, rhythm is really your friend, and I want to equip you to discover how your homeschool rhythm can really help you relax. And that's what we all want, right? That's what we're talking about today, rhythm, routine, and schedules. So let's dive in. Rhythm is really all about organizing your homeschool day. I remember when I was first starting out homeschooling and had this sense that every single day was just this huge expanse of time, right? Totally open, unformed day ahead, right? And I felt really intimidated by that. It's a big responsibility to fill all of that time in meaningful ways. And so how does one go about structuring a homeschool day when it's just so wide open like that? Well, let's start with some foundational truths. So you know that game, Two Truths and a Lie? Here we go. We're going to play this game. The first, life is complicated, so let's simplify it. The second, rhythm can help you. The third, the idea of rhythm is to really pack every second of the day full of activities. That's the lie. In case you didn't guess, the third one is the lie. So our two truths are these. One, life is complicated, so we really want to simplify. And two, rhythm can help you do just that. So in this episode, I want to share some practical ideas about how rhythm can really help us as homeschoolers. And then I have 3 tips for you as you bring this to your family. Our lives are complicated, that is for sure. As parents, as mothers, we wear so many different hats. Have you ever read one of those descriptions of a job description of motherhood, right? And they say things like being on call 24/7 and having no sick leave and doing all of these incredible chores of taking care of children's emotions and taking care of the house and taking care of the pets and taking care of the husbands and all of those things. And then, all of these activities you're going to do at no pay, for no pay. It's a crazy profession we've chosen. But I will also argue that it is probably the most important work that we could be doing in this world. So as I see it, our lives being so complicated and with all these different moving pieces and parts, we want to find ways to, with a sense of ease, to bring some form, right, to each day. Now, at the same time, I would argue that in this time of the world we live, it's very arrhythmic, which simply means there's not a whole lot of rhythm. There aren't a lot of activities in our lives that only happen, right, on certain days or at certain times. We have instant access to so many different things. And we don't really have to wait for much. We could do it now. We could do anything we want right now in the moment. And I would just argue that that makes rhythm harder to bring on the one hand, but also I would say more important to bring to our families and our children, more necessary. So let's just start with what it is. I remember when I first heard the word rhythm in reference to homeschooling, and it really baffled me. Uh, First of all, I'd only known of this concept as it was used in reference to music, really up until that point. I had no idea. I was trained as a teacher, classroom teacher, and I just had no idea how it could help or how it could be even applied to teaching and learning. To be honest, it took a long time for me to figure it out. And I want to help you shorten that learning curve. So we want to have a clear understanding of this idea of rhythm so that our days can flow more smoothly. That's really the end goal. And I finally discovered that for myself. It took a while, but I came to really appreciate and love this idea of rhythm, because it can hold us in a way where we feel cared for and held. So what is rhythm? It's quite literally a repeated pattern. Think of music. Like I said, one of the things that's so appealing about music to our human brains is that there are these repeated motifs or sequences. We come to expect these repetitions of a series of notes, and we actually look forward to them and anticipate them. It's very interesting because what they allow our brains to do is to relax into the listening experience whenever it shows up, right? So the first measure of a piece of music often has one of these themes that then, after a few minutes into the song, it comes back again, and then it comes back again a little bit later too, and we come to expect that. This repetition brings us comfort, even when the notes aren't exactly the same each time, like there can be some variation. It's similar enough to recognize it, that we recognize it, and we don't then we don't have to work so hard to understand or tune in, connect, with the piece of music. So let's just start with that idea. Then a second idea that I want to share is that we have, there is a sea. We live in a sea of natural rhythms all around us. So the first is that inside of ourselves, we have our heartbeat, right? There's a regular rhythm to our heartbeat that happens without us really having to think about it very much. Also, our breathing is the same. There's a pattern, a regular, repeated pattern to our breathing that happens no matter what. So that's inside of our bodies. Then let's think about all the natural rhythms outside of our bodies, like the seasons, right? That one season follows another, or the days of the week. And those natural rhythms inside of our bodies and outside of our bodies are just happening all the time. I like to think of these as concentric circles. So our heartbeat is at the very middle, at the very center of these concentric circles, and we move out from there, out into the outer ring of the rhythm of the year, which is the seasons. And all of these rhythms are there to support us, right? I like to picture these concentric circles because it helps me feel held and supported. So the ones that we then are going to focus on are the daily and weekly rhythms and the lesson rhythms that we are creating as homeschoolers for our kids. And so we're not responsible for it all, right? These natural rhythms are happening inside of us and all around us, and we are going to craft the rhythm of the day and the rhythm of the lessons. So as homeschooling parents, this idea of the daily rhythm, it's like a schedule without the times, right? It's just really a flow of activities. And the activities happen in relation to each other, like they flow from one to another. And the more similar we can have that flow be from one day to the next, the easier it is for everyone, including ourselves, to step into the activities. So how do we go about crafting this? Well, let me tell you what most of us do. What most of us do is, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to make a list of everything that needs to be done in a day, right? And then put that list like in chronological order, right? So we get up and we eat breakfast. We think about, probably one of the first things we think about is all the, the wake up time, the bedtime, and the meal times. And those can be become anchor points in our day. Well, then we begin to fill in the chunks of time in the morning, in the afternoon, and pretty soon what happens to most of us is that it's too full. Our days are too full. Has that ever happened to you? Or the opposite can sometimes happen. If we're home with just really little children, our days can feel like there's so not a whole lot to do. So here's what I suggest. I want you to try applying these two different concepts to this idea of rhythm. And one is called habit stacking, and the second is called time blocking. So what is habit stacking? Habit stacking is when you start with one activity and it should be something that you do regularly already without thinking about it. So it might be, brushing your teeth in the morning or eating breakfast or something like that. And then you want to add a new activity onto that one. And that way you can build up your rhythm. So your morning rhythm might be something like, waking up, getting dressed, having breakfast, tidying up, gathering for warm-up time or a morning basket time or something like that, then having a story, skills practice. But each of those components, if they're not happening yet, it's really hard to go from like 0 to 60 in one day. So what you want to do is layer each activity in. This is the idea of habit stacking over, if you have 6 different activities that you want to be doing in the mornings, you might need 6 weeks to layer this in, but you'd start with an activity that you already do now and add one new one, and do that for a while until it feels more natural and comfortable. Then add a second one so that you have 3 activities in a row, and that's how you would build up your rhythm with this idea of habit stacking. Now, the second concept is this idea of time blocking. So it's simply carving out these chunks of time for certain types of activities. And these can be included on your rhythm chart. So you might just have a time block for lessons, but you don't have all the details in your rhythm chart that you make for what's going to go in that time. You could plan that separately. So what a simple rhythm might look like with time blocks simply could be the wake up time, breakfast, morning time, lunch, afternoon time. Sometimes we break that into 2 parts, dinner and then bedtime. That's the simplest rhythm. And then what we want to do is further define those blocks of time. So you might start to plan your lesson time in the mornings and decide to include perhaps, songs and verses and story and artistic activities. But you still want to keep that super simple too. That's your lesson rhythm. And it could just end up being, depends on the ages of your children, but it could end up being, 1 hour of focus time or 90 minutes or 2 to 3 hours. But that's how you begin to define what those blocks of time are going to include. So I just want to encourage you to find what works for your family. There's a wonderful book, Simplicity Parenting, written by Kim John Payne, where he really talks in such helpful ways about this idea of rhythm. And here's a great quote from the book. He said, "The magic of rhythm is in the process, not in the particulars." So it really allows, this idea of rhythm, it really allows us to have a guideline and a flow, but it's not about, what's the best rhythm. It's not about what other people's rhythms are. It's simply about working with rhythm, right, on a regular basis so that you can bring a sense of comfort and help children know what to expect, because there are some repeated patterns happening from day to day in your homeschool life. My very first rhythm chart that I ever made, it was like on a half sheet of paper, right? So I took an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and I folded it in half, and it was actually the steps to my day were horizontal. I usually like nowadays to put a rhythm chart vertically, but it's totally up to you. But I had these 6, maybe, I can't remember how many steps there were. I'll tell you what they were in just a minute. But just across this page, this half sheet of paper, my kids were still little, so they weren't even in the grades yet, my boys, I don't think, and they weren't reading. So I drew little pictures, like little icons with a word underneath it for the different parts of the day that I wanted them and me to begin to get comfortable with or familiar with. And I think on this piece of paper, and then I colored it and I laminated it with that clear contact paper, and it included breakfast, story time, lunch, read aloud, rest time, playtime, dinner, and bedtime. And when we would do read aloud time, we usually would have tea as well. So I think it said tea time and read aloud. And that was it. And I put it up, like I said, I put it in contact paper and I put it up with a magnet on the refrigerator, and that was our first rhythm chart. But it really did help because I tend to vary from what I might have had planned or whatever. And it was work for me to begin to develop the will to do these similar activities each day, right, with my kids. And it helps to hang a chart up on the wall so that everybody's on the same page and you don't have to keep reminding everybody verbally about what they're supposed to be doing right next. My experience with my 3 kids and my husband, who's self-employed, and he's always worked from home. So trying to create a rhythm for our family was not easy. Like I said, it didn't come naturally to me. And my husband is super spontaneous. So he can even be a little scattered sometimes. So I needed to help him understand this concept of rhythm as well. And it took some time. But this is where a rhythm chart on the wall can really help. Everyone can see it. You can refer to it gently, and you can use it to remind yourself that you really do have a plan on those days when everything seems to be off. Oh, right. Let's sit down with a good book. That's what we're going to do now. Okay, so I have 3 tips for you to help you stay on track as you begin to implement or further your experience, your relationship with this idea of rhythm. So the first tip number 1 is rhythm is not meant to be rigid. Some constraints are good, right? Like, remember what I was saying about that huge open expanse of time. We want to begin to form it so that we don't have to keep reinventing things every single day. It's like a dance, and you want to find that sweet spot of structure and freedom. I've been saying this, I've found myself saying a lot to homeschooling parents lately, parents who I work with, this idea of how our relationship to a plan, right? And I think we want to practice saying this to ourselves every single day. Here's what I have planned for today. Let's give it a go and see what happens. Right? So it's this idea, I love the phrase, hold tight loosely, right? It can help us just shift our thinking a little bit about our role as the homeschooling parent, and it can make a huge difference. We want to plan, like create a plan, step into the plan and see how it goes, right? And then just be curious about, oh, look, this happened. When we tried this, this happened. And when we tried that, it didn't go so well. So don't create, like I want to caution you against creating a rhythm and then trying to impose it on everyone. That is not the idea here. We want to relax into the rhythm. And in order to do this, you have to keep it simple enough that it works. Don't make it so complicated. Don't make it so overly full, right? Over and over again, as I'm mentoring homeschoolers who want help with their rhythm, we discover that what they really need is to simplify even more, right? As humans, and I think as mothers especially, we tend to pack too much into every single day. I know this comes from a good, like a sense of responsibility as the homeschooling parent, and that's a good thing. But I will just caution you against packing it too full, because if you do, it falls apart and nothing gets done, right? And I do know that from experience. So do less so that you can connect more. Because connection happens during the downtime, right? And as mamas, we're going to burn out if we are the director all day long, right? So remember, kids are learning all the time. We want to do less so that we can connect more. Another quote from Kim John Payne, he said, relationships are often built in the intervals, the spaces between activities when nothing much is going on. Oh, so true, so true. All right, tip number 2 is be gentle with yourself. Don't use your rhythm to beat yourself up, meaning just notice what you say to yourself when you don't follow your rhythm, right? Just notice how it went. Like I said, you want to relax into the rhythm rather than trying to impose it. And creating a rhythm, it's not something you have to do in order to be a good homeschooler, right? It's something that's meant to help you. So think about it that way. It's your friend. Like, think about how, oh, this is going to help my days flow more smoothly. So I'm going to find a way, right, for this to work for my family. And it's going to look different for everyone. Sometimes we think this is another mistake people make. Sometimes we think if we have a perfect rhythm, whatever that may be, doesn't exist. But sometimes we think if it's perfect, then our day will go perfectly. No, there are no guarantees here. It's just a guide. Your rhythm is there as a guide to provide a certain rhythmical order to your day so that you and your children can step in more easily without as much effort. So just make a rhythm chart, hang it up on the wall, and do your best to follow it. That's it. That's really it. Let it be a guide, relax into it rather than trying to impose it. Okay, tip number 3. Sometimes your rhythm will fall apart, and that's okay. So transitions to a new year, you've had a break, a holiday, and you're coming back to your lessons. Maybe you're in an overwhelming time of life. Perhaps somebody's been ill. You've been on break and you're just starting back. You've been traveling, right? Or on a vacation. Or you're brand new to homeschooling. Or you're brand new to this idea of rhythm. Whatever it is, it's okay that it's going to fall apart sometimes. It's actually to be expected that your rhythm and your routines are going to fall apart sometimes. So just remember that when you're beginning a new homeschooling year or coming back after a break, this is actually, rhythm is a great place to start. And I like to start focusing on our rhythm, 2 to 3 weeks before beginning lessons. That's what I would do when we were homeschooling, to start with rhythm rather than the curriculum, right? It really helps the transition go much more smoothly. I know, ask me how I know. It's kind of the idea, the concept of a soft start, right? And so you can introduce the rhythm before you begin to really get into the lessons that you'll be bringing to your kids. And remember this idea of scale back until it works and then add from there. That's a mantra that I have to repeat to myself, and I share with all the homeschoolers I know, because when it isn't working, sometimes we tend to say, oh, it's not working at all, and set it aside completely or toss it out. And actually, it's a matter of simplifying, like I said. So remember to simplify until it works and then add from there. Another helpful thing about being gentle with yourself is to have a little plan in your back pocket that I like to call the minimum viable homeschooling day. And this could be whatever you want. For me, I have this idea of the 30-30-30 approach, which is simply 30 minutes of read aloud time, 30 minutes of math practice, and 30 minutes outdoors. And then we're good, right? We did our homeschooling for the day. So if you're in a tough season right now, or really overwhelmed or stressed or having a hard time, or your rhythm is going okay and then something comes up, and you need a little bit of a reprieve, right? Then have some simple plan in mind that for those days when the rhythm is just not going to happen. And if your rhythm is not serving you, right, the answer is not to try harder to make it happen. It's to lighten up and simplify, right? Simplify everything instead. And then I think you'll begin to really appreciate this idea of rhythm, and instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, it's so hard and I don't understand it and I don't, it never works for me or whatever. If you begin to have this sense of when it does work, you'll see that children really thrive on a predictable rhythm, and they are often more relaxed too, which is a huge benefit to learning, because children can't learn when they're stressed or tired or anxious. So I just want to encourage you so that you can be flexible with this, right? You don't want to be so rigid that you're not willing to see what your family needs. But this idea of like how much to put in your rhythm and how much to include in each day, it's really, there's no one answer. It really comes with practice, and you begin to get a sense of what's working now, and then it changes, right? It's just this idea of parenting. Every time we figure it out, it changes. So observe as you go, right? My question for you just would be to invite you to step back for a second and say, ask yourself, where am I with this concept of rhythm right now? So if it's brand new to you, start really small with those super simple sort of anchor points to your day. If you're overwhelmed in your life right now, remember that concept of scale back until it works and then add from there. For me, it's still a work in progress. Even though my kids are all young adults now, I still have a daily rhythm with morning activities and afternoon activities on it that help guide me through my days, right? And I encourage you to do the same. It's there to help. So today we have talked about 2 truths and 3 tips. Here are the 2 truths. 1, life is complicated, so let's simplify it. And 2, rhythm can help. And while you deepen your work, as you're deepening your work with rhythm, don't forget these 3 tips, right? Rhythm is not meant to be rigid. Be gentle with yourself, and sometimes your rhythm will fall apart, and that's okay. You can always find your way back. If you want help crafting your rhythm for your family, I have a free guide on my website. It's called Save Your Homeschooling Day, 3 Steps to Rescue Your Rhythm for a Simple, Happy Homeschool. And you can find it at artofhomeschooling.com/free guide. And if you want to dive deeper, I have a whole masterclass called Rescue Your Rhythm inside my Homeschool with Waldorf membership. This is a monthly membership community. And if you're interested, you can find out more about that on my website too. So for a recap of this episode and links to any of the resources that I've mentioned here, you can check out the show notes for this episode on my website as well. And just go to artofhomeschooling.com/episode 3.
That's all for today, my friend. But here's what I want you to remember. Rather than perfection, let's focus on connection. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Art of Homeschooling podcast.